Captain Thompson called me into his office on a Tuesday morning in late October. Didn't waste time with pleasantries. Beacon Rock needs a keeper, he said. Patrick Mendez's position. You interested? I'd heard about Mendez. Everyone at the station had. 3 months back, he'd stopped responding to check-ins. Coast Guard sent a crew out to the Lighthouse, found the place empty. No body, no signs of struggle, just an unmanned station and the beacon still rotating through the fog. What happened to him? Thompson's jaw worked. He shuffled papers on his desk without looking at them. Official report says accidental drowning. Man gets careless on those rocks, the ocean doesn't give second chances. I nodded. Made sense on paper. Lighthouse keepers worked alone for weeks at a stretch. Maintained equipment in all weather. Navigated slick rocks with nothing but ocean below. Accidents happened. It's solo rotation, Thompson continued. 2 weeks on, 1 week off. Supply boat comes every Sunday, weather permitting, radio check-in twice daily. He finally met my eyes. Pays decent. Solitude's free. The solitude part appealed to me. I'd been bunking at the station for 8 months, sharing quarters with a rotating cast of coasties who liked their music loud and their conversations constant. My last relationship had ended badly. Badly enough that I'd requested transfer from Chicago to this nowhere posting on the Washington coast. Beacon Rock sounded perfect. Just me, the ocean, and a lighthouse that needed tending. I'll take it, I said. Thompson's shoulders dropped half an inch. Relief, maybe. Or something else I couldn't name. Good. Supply boat leaves Sunday at 0700. Pack for 2 weeks. I stood to leave, but his voice stopped me at the door. Caden. I turned back. He was looking at those papers again, his weathered hands flat against the desk. Follow the protocols, all of them. No improvisation. Of course. I mean it. His gray eyes found mine. Lighthouse keeping isn't complicated, but it requires discipline. You understand? Yes, sir. He dismissed me with a nod, but I caught him watching through his office window as I crossed the yard. The way you'd watch someone walking toward something you couldn't warn them about. Should have paid more attention to that. The supply boat cut through choppy water under an overcast sky. Beacon Rock rose from the ocean like a broken tooth, gray stone jutting 200 feet above the waterline, barely wide enough for the lighthouse and its support buildings. The lighthouse itself stood 70 feet tall, white paint gone dingy from salt spray and weather. Its beacon housing gleamed dull red in the flat morning light. Cheerful spot, the boat pilot said. His name was Marcus, 40-something with a face like cured leather. He'd been running supplies to Beacon Rock for 6 years. You knew Mendez? Marcus kept his eyes on the approach. Waves broke against the rock's eastern face, throwing spray 20 feet up. Well enough. Quiet guy. Did his job. He ever mention anything unusual out here? Unusual how? I shrugged, just wondering why he'd end up in the water. Seems like a guy who'd been here that long would know better. Marcus cut the throttle as we neared the dock, a concrete platform on the rock's western side, protected from the worst swells by a natural outcropping. People get comfortable, get careless. Ocean's patient. He didn't believe that. I could hear it in the way he said it, like repeating something he'd been told to say. We unloaded supplies in silence. 2 weeks of food, diesel for the generator, propane canisters, fresh water. Marcus helped me haul it up the wooden stairs carved into the rock face. 112 steps from the dock to the lighthouse grounds. I counted. The lighthouse keeper's quarters stood separate from the tower itself. A small building with living space, kitchen, and storage. Marcus showed me the generator, the water filtration system, the radio setup. Standard equipment, all of it. Nothing I hadn't seen before. Radio check-in at 0800 and 2000, he said. Don't miss them. Thompson gets twitchy when keepers go silent. I bet he did. Marcus lingered at the dock longer than necessary before casting off. Stood there with the boat idling, looking up at me on the stairs. What? I called down. Nothing. He shook his head. See you Sunday? I watched him motor away until the boat became a speck against the gray water. Then I climbed back to the lighthouse and got to work. The Coast Guard's official line was clean and simple. Patrick Mendez drowned. Accidental death in the line of duty. But I'd been at the station when those final radio transmissions came through. I'd been filing reports in the communications room, 3 desks away from the radio operator, when Mendez's voice crackled across the channel. The operator, a kid named Stevens, couldn't have been more than 22, had answered the routine check-in call, expecting the usual brief confirmation. Instead, Mendez's voice came through tight and strained. There's something in the water. Stevens had glanced around the room. 2 other coasties working at their desks, me, pretending to focus on paperwork. Repeat that, Beacon Rock. You have a visual on something in the water. Eastern side. They've been circling since sunset. They? I don't... Static washed across the channel. When Mendez's voice returned, it had climbed half an octave. They're not boats, not whales. They're just... shapes. Christ, there's so many of them. Stevens had straightened in his chair, his training kicking in despite the weirdness of it. Beacon Rock, are you reporting a maritime hazard? Do you need assistance? Don't send anyone. Mendez's voice cracked. Don't send anyone out here at night. Tell Thompson. The transmission cut to static, pure white noise that filled the communications room. Stevens tried for 20 minutes to raise Beacon Rock again. Nothing but static. He'd reported it to Thompson, who'd logged it and told him to keep trying. By morning, when Mendez still hadn't responded to check-in, they'd sent the crew out, found the lighthouse empty. Thompson had played those transmissions once in a briefing, then ordered them sealed in Mendez's personnel file. Stress-induced episode, he'd said. Man was alone too long, started seeing things. Maybe. But I'd heard Mendez's voice. That hadn't been confusion or loneliness. That had been fear. I spent the first 3 days settling in, learned the lighthouse's rhythms, its sounds and quirks. The beacon rotated on a motorized track, 1 revolution every 12 seconds. The foghorn sat dormant unless visibility dropped below a quarter mile, when it would sound every 30 seconds, a deep, mournful note that rattled the tower's windows. The generator hummed in its shed, burning through diesel at a steady rate. Nights. I kept the lamp room windows uncovered, watched the beacon sweep across black water, revealing nothing but waves and occasional whitecaps. The eastern waters stayed dark between rotations, empty. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching back. On the 4th day, I started my inspection of the basement. The lighthouse tower had a storage basement carved into the rock itself, accessible through a heavy door at the tower's base, down a flight of stone steps that stayed damp year-round. Coast Guard used it for backup equipment, spare parts, old maintenance logs. I'd been putting off the inventory. Basements cut into rock have a particular smell, mineral and cold, with an edge of standing water. This one had that plus something else, something that made my skin crawl. I went down anyway. Job required it. The basement ran about 20 feet square, stone walls weeping moisture, a single bulb hanging from a wire overhead. Shelves lined 3 walls, stocked with coils of rope, rusted tools, cans of paint gone solid with age. A workbench occupied the 4th wall, its surface cluttered with broken equipment someone had meant to repair and never had. I was cataloging the shelves when I noticed the loose stone. Knee-height on the eastern wall, 1 block sat proud of the others by maybe a 1/4 inch. Wouldn't have caught it, except the way the light fell made a shadow along its edge. I crouched down. The stone moved when I touched it, rocking slightly in its setting. Took me 5 minutes to work it free. Behind it, someone had carved a shallow niche into the rock. Inside the niche, a composition notebook, the kind kids use for school. Its cover was water-stained and warped, edges curled. I pulled it out. opened to the first page. Patrick Mendez's handwriting, neat and precise. If you're reading this, you're the new keeper. That means I'm gone, one way or another. What I'm writing here isn't in any official log because they wouldn't believe it. Maybe you won't either. But you need to know. My pulse kicked up. I flipped through the pages. Dozens of entries. The handwriting staying controlled for the first half, then degrading into frantic scrawl toward the end. The last entry took up 2 full pages. At the top, underlined 3 times, rules for surviving Beacon Rock. Below it, 7 numbered items. 1. Never shine the beacon toward the eastern waters. The automated rotation is set to skip that arc. Do not adjust it. Do not override it. They don't like the light. 2. You will hear voices calling from the ocean. Familiar voices. People you know. People you've lost. They will beg for help. They will sound real. Do not listen. Do not respond. Cover your ears if you must, but do not go to the windows. 3. Avoid the tide pools on the eastern rocks during new moon nights. Do not look into them. Do not let your shadow fall across the water. What lives there only surfaces in complete darkness. 4. Keep all windows covered after midnight. Use the shutters. Check them twice. If something sees you seeing it, you've made a connection you can't break. 5. Between 2 and 4 a.m., ships may request emergency assistance. You will see their lights, hear their distress calls. Do not respond. Do not acknowledge. These ships are not real. The people calling for help are already gone. 6. Maintain the foghorn's rhythm exactly. Every 30 seconds when visibility drops. Not 29 seconds, not 31. They've learned to expect the pattern. Breaking it draws attention. 7. If the lighthouse beacon goes out, mechanical failure, power loss, any reason, do not leave the lamp room until dawn. Seal the door. Stay away from the windows. Wait for daylight. What hunts in the dark cannot reach you there, but only while you stay still and silent. My hands had gone cold. I read through the list 3 times, then flipped back through the notebook's earlier entries. Mendez had documented everything. Dates, times, observations, things he'd seen in the water. Shapes that didn't match any marine life he could identify, sounds that came from beneath the lighthouse on moonless nights, the way the eastern tide pools sometimes reflected stars that weren't in the sky. The final entry, written below the rules in handwriting gone shaky and cramped. I broke Rule 4. I had to see. I had to know what they were. God help me, now they've seen me too. Don't make my mistake. Follow the rules. Don't try to understand. Just survive. The date on that entry, 3 days before Mendez's last transmission. I sat on the basement floor, notebook open in my lap, and felt the truth settle into my bones. The Coast Guard hadn't assigned me to maintain a lighthouse. They'd assigned me to survive it, and whatever had taken Patrick Mendez was still out there in the dark water, waiting. The helicopter came at first light. I was in the lamp room when I heard it, running through the morning checklist with Mendez's notebook still weighing heavy in my jacket pocket. The sound started as a distant thump somewhere to the west, growing louder until the whole tower vibrated with rotor wash. I'd been expecting the Sunday supply boat. Marcus wasn't due for another 3 days. Nobody sends a helicopter for routine business. I moved down the spiral stairs 2 at a time, hit the main door, stepped out onto the platform. The wind from the rotors flattened the grass against the rock and threw spray up from the ocean below, Coast Guard markings on the fuselage. The pilot kept it steady maybe 20 feet above the landing pad on the western side while a figure dropped out the open door. Captain Thompson landed in a crouch that absorbed the impact wrong. Too fluid, too controlled. He moved toward me while the helicopter pulled away, and I got my first real look at him outside the artificial light of his office. The man moved wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. He covered the distance between the landing pad and the lighthouse entrance with this predatory grace that didn't match his age or his uniform. Muscles shifted under his jacket in ways that suggested a lifetime of physical work, but it was more than that. Every step placed with absolute precision, every movement economical and deliberate. His eyes caught the morning light as he approached, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. They reflected. Just for a second, just a flash when the angle was right, but I saw it. Pale blue going bright and metallic, the way a cat's eyes shine when headlights hit them at night. Lawson. He didn't offer a hand, didn't slow down, just kept walking until I had to step aside or get walked through. Inside. I followed him into the keeper's quarters. He'd never been here before, at least not that I knew, but he moved through the space without hesitation, scanning shelves and surfaces with systematic efficiency, looking for something specific. Personal effects, he said, clipped, direct. Mendez left items behind. I need them collected and cataloged. I'd prepared for this, had the notebook transferred to my bedroom already, tucked between the mattress and box spring where a casual search wouldn't find it, but my hands still went clammy. Already boxed most of it, I said. Clothes, toiletries, some books, standard stuff. Thompson's gaze locked onto me. Those pale eyes didn't blink. Most of it. Not a question. A statement that demanded correction. I held his stare for 3 seconds. 4. Then I reached into my jacket and pulled out the notebook, held it between us. Found this yesterday, hidden in the basement. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Thompson moved fast. Faster than a man his age should move. One moment he was standing 6 feet away, the next he had the notebook in his hands and I was stepping back on instinct, my shoulder blades hitting the wall. He flipped through the pages without reading them, his jaw working. The muscles in his neck stood out in sharp relief. When he spoke, his voice had gone low and dangerous. "You read it?" "Yes, sir." "All of it?" "Yes, sir." He closed the notebook, held it against his chest with both hands, fingers white-knuckled on the worn cover. For a long moment, he just stood there, breathing carefully through his nose, staring at something over my left shoulder. Then he moved to the table and sat down hard in the chair, dropping the notebook on the scarred wood surface. "Sit." I sat. Thompson pulled a pair of reading glasses from his breast pocket, put them on with mechanical precision, opened the notebook to the final entry. Read through Mendez's 7 rules without comment. When he finished, he removed the glasses, folded them, returned them to his pocket. "What do you think this place is, Lawson?" The question caught me off guard. "Lighthouse Station, Beacon Rock, marks the hazard for shipping lanes heading." "What do you think it really is?" I glanced at the notebook between us. "Guard post." Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. Might have been something darker. "The official navigation charts show a shallow reef system extending 3 miles east of this rock," Thompson said. His voice had shifted, gone formal and precise, like he was delivering a briefing. "What the charts don't show is the trench. Runs parallel to the coast, depth exceeding 12,000 feet in some sections. Cold water, deep currents that rise during certain tidal conditions." He tapped the notebook with one finger. "Things live down there, Lawson. Things that evolved in pressure and darkness humans can't survive. Things that shouldn't be able to reach the surface." He paused. "But they do. Right here. This section of ocean where the currents rise and the continental shelf drops away to nothing." My mouth had gone dry. "What kind of things?" "The kind that made Mendez write those rules." Thompson stood, walked to the eastern window, stared out at the morning water, gray and restless under cloudy skies. "The kind that mimic voices, that project images, that send false distress calls to lure ships into the eastern waters during the hours when they're most active. He turned back to face me, and the light caught his eyes again. That brief, metallic flash. This lighthouse doesn't just mark a hazard, it creates one. The beam acts as a barrier. The entities down there, they can't cross it. Don't know if it's the light itself or the frequency or something else. But they stay in the eastern waters. Stay away from shore, as long as the beacon runs on schedule and nobody breaks the protocols. I thought about Mendez's final entry. If you're reading this, I broke Rule 4. I looked at what was watching me. What happens when someone breaks the protocols? Thompson's expression went flat. You're sitting in his quarters. The words hit harder than I expected. I'd known Mendez was dead, had heard his final transmission, but having Thompson confirm it, having him stand there and state it plain, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. I need the official maintenance log, Thompson said, the one Coast Guard requires you to keep. I retrieved it from the shelf above the radio equipment. Standard issue hardbound ledger, already half filled with entries from previous keepers going back 6 years. Equipment checks, weather observations, supply deliveries, routine documentation. Thompson took it to the table, opened to the first blank page, uncapped a pen from his pocket, started writing in precise block letters. I watched over his shoulder as he transcribed Mendez's 7 rules, rewording them into official-sounding protocols. But he didn't just copy them. He expanded them, added details that Mendez had only hinted at. Rule 1. Never redirect the lighthouse beam toward eastern waters during operational hours. The beam maintains a western sweep pattern that must not be altered. Eastern sweep would expose coastal population centers to unshielded contact with hostile entities currently contained in deep water zones. Rule 2. Disregard all auditory phenomena resembling human voices originating from ocean surface. Entities demonstrate advanced mimicry capabilities, including replication of familiar voices, distress calls, and conversational patterns designed to provoke investigation. No human presence exists in eastern waters. Any perceived human sounds are hostile contact attempts. My hands had started shaking. I gripped the back of Thompson's chair to steady them. Rule 3. Avoid eastern tide pool zones during new moon phase. Lunar cycles affect entity behavior and vertical migration patterns. Surface activity increases during new moon darkness. Entities have demonstrated limited terrestrial mobility in shallow water environments during peak activity periods. Rule 4. Maintain window coverings on all eastern-facing apertures between ERO00 and ERO600 hours. Entities employ visual contact as primary assessment method. Direct observation of keeper increases targeted behavior and breach attempts. Prevent all visual exchange during peak activity hours. Thompson's handwriting remained steady. Perfect. Each letter formed with mechanical precision while my own pulse hammered in my throat. Rule 5. Ignore all maritime distress calls received between ERO200 and O400 hours. Entities broadcast false emergency transmissions on standard Coast Guard frequencies to initiate rescue response. No legitimate vessel traffic occurs in eastern waters during these hours. All distress calls during this window are hostile contact attempts requiring no response. Rule 6. Maintain exact foghorn timing during low visibility conditions. 30-second intervals. No deviation. Foghorn frequency disrupts entity echolocation and navigation systems. Timing irregularities compromise acoustic barrier effectiveness and permit closer approach to lighthouse position. He was almost finished. One rule left. Rule 7. In event of primary beacon failure, keeper will seal lamp room access and remain in upper tower until dawn. Do not attempt repairs during darkness. Do not exit tower. Do not respond to any external stimuli. Beacon failure removes primary barrier. Entities will approach lighthouse structure. Lamp room elevation provides temporary safety. Maintain position until sunrise when entity surface activity decreases. Thompson set down his pen, closed the logbook, looked at me with those pale eyes that caught the light wrong. These aren't suggestions, Lawson. They're survival protocols based on documented encounters going back 30 years. Every keeper who followed them lived. Every keeper who didn't. He tapped the closed logbook. Well, you've got Mendez's quarters now. I wanted to ask how many keepers had died here, how many had broken the rules and paid for it. But my voice wouldn't work. Thompson stood, tucked Mendez's notebook under his arm. This stays with me. The official log stays here. You follow every protocol exactly as written. You complete your rotation. You report anything unusual during radio checks using the standard code phrases we established. And if something happens that isn't covered by the rules? He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame, looked back at me. Use your judgment. Stay alive. The lighthouse has to keep running. He stepped outside, then added without turning, That's the real job, Lawson. Not the beacon, not the foghorn. Keeping yourself functional enough to maintain the barrier. Because if this light goes dark and stays dark, those things in the eastern waters will reach the mainland in less than 6 hours. He walked toward the landing pad where the helicopter was already descending. I stood in the doorway and watched him climb aboard, watched the aircraft lift and bank west toward the coast, watched it disappear into the gray morning clouds. The ocean stretched out before me, east and west, gray water under gray sky. I went back inside, sat at the table, opened the maintenance log and read through Thompson's expanded rules again, my hands still trembling slightly. Entities that mimic voices, false ships broadcasting distress calls, creatures from 12,000-foot depths that can't cross the lighthouse beam but want to reach shore, want to reach populated areas. And I'm sitting here alone on a rock in the middle of their hunting grounds, maintaining the only thing keeping them contained. Mendez had figured this out, had documented it, had survived for months following protocols he'd discovered through trial and error. Then he'd broken Rule 4, looked at what was watching him. 3 days later, he was dead. I closed the logbook, sat there in the quiet keeper's quarters with the morning light coming through the western windows and the eastern windows still covered with their heavy curtains. The generator hummed its steady rhythm below. The beacon rotated overhead. 12-second intervals, exactly as specified. Everything normal, everything routine, except I finally understood what Thompson had actually hired me to do. This wasn't a lighthouse assignment. It was a combat posting, and the enemy wasn't weather or equipment failure or isolation. It was something that lived in the deep water and wanted to get out. Something that had killed before. Something that would kill me if I made the same mistakes Mendez made. I thought about the next 13 days stretching ahead. The nights watching the covered eastern windows, the early morning hours listening for false distress calls, the new moon period when I'd have to stay away from the tide pools. Thought about Thompson's eyes catching the light, that predatory grace, that wrong way he moved. Wondered how long he'd been running this operation, how much he really knew about the things in the eastern waters, what he'd seen or done that made him move and look the way he did. The radio crackled to life. Marcus on the supply boat frequency confirming next Sunday's delivery. I acknowledged, kept my voice steady, maintained normal operations, because that was the job now. Stay normal, stay functional, stay alive. Keep the light burning, keep the barrier intact, keep the things in the deep water exactly where they were. I stood up, returned the logbook to its shelf, started my morning rounds, equipment check, fuel levels, beacon rotation, all the routine maintenance tasks that suddenly felt a lot less routine. The lighthouse had to keep running, and I had to keep running it, no matter what was waiting in the eastern waters. The first night started ordinary enough. I ran through my checklist at 1700 hours. Beacon rotation smooth, foghorn pressure stable, generator fuel at 70%. The kind of routine that would have put me at ease back when I thought this was just lighthouse work. But that was before Thompson's visit, before I understood what lived in the eastern waters. I climbed to the lamp room around sunset, carrying the official log Thompson had left. Wanted to review the expanded protocols one more time before dark. The lamp room windows faced all directions, 8 panels of thick glass that gave a 360 view of the ocean. During the day, I kept the eastern ones covered with the canvas shades Mendez had installed. Thompson's protocols specified that clearly, windows covered after midnight. Didn't say anything about before. I pulled the western shade aside and watched the sun drop toward the horizon. The ocean changed as the light died. Not gradually, not the normal shift from blue to gray that happens with any sunset. This was different, wrong in a way that made my stomach tighten. The water took on an oily quality, thick and dark, almost viscous looking. The surface gleamed with a sheen that reminded me of diesel fuel spreading across a parking lot puddle. But underneath that surface, beneath that unnatural darkness, something moved. Phosphorescent trails. They writhed in the depths, glowing with a sickly green-white luminescence that pulsed and shifted. Long, sinuous shapes that could have been massive serpents coiling through the black water, or tentacles, or something I didn't have words for. The trails moved with purpose, circling patterns that spiraled outward from some central point I couldn't see, couldn't make myself look at directly. I stepped back from the window. My hand found the canvas shade and I yanked it down, blocking out the view. My heart hammered against my ribs. The beacon rotated overhead, its 12-second cycle casting sweeping light across the walls. I counted the rhythm without thinking, old habit from my deck watch days. 12 seconds. Consistent. Normal. Nothing else about this was normal. I moved to the center of the lamp room, away from all the windows. The official log sat on the small desk Mendez had positioned beneath the beacon mechanism. I flipped it open to the expanded protocols Thompson had transcribed. Rule 4 stood out in his precise handwriting. Keep windows covered after midnight. Entity visual contact causes psychological damage. Direct eye contact with primary forms results in catatonic state within 48 out 72 hours. Primary forms. Thompson hadn't explained what that meant, hadn't described what Mendez saw that killed him 3 days after he looked. I didn't want to find out. I checked my watch. 18:30, 6.5 hours until midnight. The protocols didn't forbid looking before then, but I covered the remaining windows anyway. Pulled every canvas shade down and secured them with the tie straps Mendez had rigged. The lamp room felt smaller with the outside world blocked out. Just me and the rotating beacon and the knowledge of what swam in the darkness beyond these walls. The evening passed slow. I stayed in the lamp room, monitoring the beacon, reviewing the protocols until I had them memorized. The radio crackled occasionally with distant traffic. Commercial vessels reporting positions, weather updates, the normal chatter of ships moving through shipping lanes 50 miles west. Nothing from the eastern waters, nothing close. At 2200, I descended to the keeper's quarters and made coffee. Ate a sandwich I didn't taste. The protocols didn't require me to stay awake, but sleep seemed impossible. I'd tried the previous 3 nights and managed maybe 4 hours total, always jerking awake with the sensation of being watched. Tonight, I didn't bother. I climbed back to the lamp room at 23:45, 15 minutes before midnight. The beacon rotated overhead, steady and bright. I did a visual check of the mechanism, gear assembly smooth, lamp filament at optimal temperature, rotation motor humming at correct frequency. Everything normal, everything functioning. Midnight came and went. I sat at the desk, the official log open in front of me, and waited for whatever came next. Thompson said the entities could reach the surface during certain tidal conditions. Tonight's tide was flooding, rising toward high at 0300. The moon was waning gibbous, 4 days past full. The protocols noted increased activity during new moon phases, but didn't say the other lunar cycles were safe. Nothing was safe out here. At 0200 I heard the foghorn sound from below, automated trigger responding to the fog bank rolling in from the northwest. 30-second intervals, exactly as specified in Rule 6. The sound vibrated through the tower's stone walls, deep and mournful, a warning to vessels that might stray too close to Beacon Rock's western shoals. At 0230 the radio crackled. Not normal traffic, not weather reports or position updates. This was different, a distress call, sharp and desperate, cutting through the static. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is the passenger vessel Meridian Star, position approximately 3 miles east of Beacon Rock. We have experienced complete engine failure. Repeat, complete engine failure. We are drifting toward the shoals with 43 souls aboard, including women and children. Requesting immediate assistance. Mayday, mayday, mayday. My hand moved toward the radio transmitter before my brain caught up. Every instinct I had, every hour of Coast Guard training, every drill, every protocol I'd learned in 8 years of service, screamed at me to respond, to acknowledge the distress call, to coordinate rescue operations. People were in danger, women and children. 43 souls. I grabbed the transmitter mic. My finger hovered over the talk button. Then I remembered Rule 5. Do not respond to false ship distress calls between 200-400 hours. Entities broadcast convincing emergency transmissions to lure rescue vessels into eastern waters. No legitimate traffic occurs in this zone during these hours. I set the mic down. The distress call repeated. Same message, same desperate tone, same details about women and children. The voice sounded human, male, middle-aged, with the clipped professionalism of an experienced captain reporting an emergency. Nothing about it seemed wrong. Nothing suggested it was anything other than a genuine mayday. Except it was coming from the eastern waters at 0230 in the morning. I stood and moved to the eastern window. My hand reached for the canvas shade before I stopped myself. Rule 4. No looking after midnight. But the binoculars hung on their peg beside the window frame, and the protocols didn't specifically forbid using them. I lifted the shade's bottom edge 6 inches. The eastern waters spread out below, black and oily under the fog. The beacon's sweep illuminated patches of surface with each rotation, brief flashes of light across the darkness. And there, maybe half a mile out, I saw lights. Ship's lights. Running lights and deck lights and what looked like cabin windows glowing warm and yellow against the black ocean. I raised the binoculars. The lights came into focus through the lenses. Red and green running lights positioned correctly for a mid-sized vessel. White masthead light. Deck illumination. Everything where it should be for a passenger ship. The Meridian Star floated dead in the water, drifting with the tide, exactly as the distress call described. But something was wrong with the lights. They blinked. Not regularly, not navigation strobes or emergency signals. They pulsed in patterns that didn't match any maritime lighting I knew. Rhythms that seemed almost organic, like breathing or a heartbeat. And the patterns hurt to watch. Made my eyes water and my head throb with a pressure that built behind my forehead. I forced myself to keep looking. Swept the binoculars across the deck. The distress call continued over the radio, the captain's voice pleading for assistance, describing their deteriorating situation. But through the binoculars, I saw the deck clearly each time the beacon swept across it. No one moved there. No crew running emergency procedures. No passengers gathering at muster stations. No captain on the bridge. The deck stood empty, lifeless. Just those pulsing lights and the dark shape of a vessel that looked right but felt wrong in every way that mattered. The radio crackled again. Mayday, mayday. We are taking on water. The children are frightened. Please, someone respond. We need immediate assistance. Beacon Rock Lighthouse, please acknowledge. My name. They were calling me specifically now. Calling the lighthouse. My hands shook. I lowered the binoculars and let the canvas shade drop back into place. The pressure in my head eased immediately, fading to a dull ache. I stepped away from the window and returned to the desk. The radio continued its desperate plea. Women crying in the background now. Children's voices calling for help. Every sound designed to trigger response, to override training, to make me grab that mic and acknowledge. I sat down and gripped the desk's edge until my knuckles went white. Rule 5 existed for a reason. Thompson said the entities could mimic voices, project images, send false distress calls. He'd documented 30 years of encounters. Keepers who followed the rules lived. Those who didn't died. I wasn't going to die for a ship that didn't exist. The calls continued for another 20 minutes. The captain's voice grew more desperate, more pleading. The background sounds intensified. Screams, crashes, the sound of rushing water. Every detail calculated to break me, to make me respond. I sat at that desk and forced myself to do nothing. Hardest thing I'd ever done. Every second felt like failure, like abandoning people who needed help. The voices of those children cut through me, high and terrified, begging someone to save them. My hand kept drifting toward the radio mic. I kept pulling it back. At 02:53, the transmission cut off, mid-scream. The silence hit harder than the noise had. I sat there in the lamp room, the beacon rotating overhead, the foghorn sounding its 30-second intervals below, and felt sick. Even knowing it was false, even seeing that empty deck through the binoculars, part of me wondered if I'd just let 43 people die. But I hadn't. There was no meridian star, no passengers, no children. Just things in the deep water that had learned what sounds would hurt us most, what calls we couldn't ignore, what bait would make us come to them instead of making them come to us. I understood now why the rules existed, why Thompson had transcribed them with such precision, why Mendez had hidden his notebook rather than leaving it where it might be destroyed. The entities didn't just kill. They studied us, learned our weaknesses, found exactly what would make us break protocol and step outside the barriers that kept us safe. And the rules were the only thing standing between survival and whatever had happened to Mendez 3 days after he looked at what was watching him. I checked my watch, 0300, high tide. The distress calls wouldn't come again until tomorrow night, but the things that sent them were still out there, still circling, still testing the lighthouse's defenses, still waiting for me to make a mistake. I wasn't going to give them one. The second night started quiet enough, same routine as the first. Equipment checks at 1700 hours, beacon rotation smooth, foghorn pressure holding steady. I climbed to the lamp room before sunset and secured all the canvas shades over the eastern windows, not waiting to see what the water would do when darkness came. Learned that lesson already. Around 2100 hours, I heard the first voice. It came from below, somewhere near the tide pools on the eastern side, clear as anything, carried up through the fog that had rolled in thick around 2030. Caden. My hand froze on the maintenance log. I knew that voice. Heard it in the recordings Marcus had played me during the supply run orientation. Patrick Mendez. Caden, I need help. I'm trapped down here in the rocks. Thompson's protocols flashed through my mind. Rule 2. Ignore familiar voices calling from the ocean. The entities mimic voices of known individuals to lure keepers away from the lighthouse. Do not respond, do not investigate, do not acknowledge. I set the pen down carefully, kept my breathing steady. The voice continued, patient and calm, exactly how Mendez sounded in those radio recordings. Measured, professional, that slight Texas drawl he had. I know you found my notebook. I know you're reading the rules, but I'm not dead, Caden. They told you I drowned, but I've been down here for 3 months. The tide pools. I can't climb out. My leg's broken. My throat felt tight. I stood and moved to the beacon mechanism, checking the rotation speed, even though I'd checked it 20 minutes earlier. Gave my hands something to do. Please. I hear you up there every day. The footsteps. I know someone's finally come. Just bring a rope. 5 minutes. That's all I need. The fog pressed against the windows. Thick stuff, the kind that swallowed sound and distance. Made everything feel close and immediate. I could picture it. Mendez down there in the dark, wedged between rocks, waiting. Hoping. Except Mendez was dead. Thompson had confirmed it. The official report said accidental drowning, and Thompson's version said visual contact with the primary forms had killed him within 72 hours. Either way, Patrick Mendez wasn't calling to me from the tide pools. Something that knew his voice was. I returned to the desk and picked up the maintenance log, wrote down the time and observation. 2107 hours. Auditory phenomenon consistent with Rule 2. Did not investigate. The pencil felt slippery in my grip. Caden, I'm getting cold. The water's rising. High tide's coming, please. I set the pencil down and gripped the edge of the desk. The wood grain pressed into my palms. Counted to 10, then 20. The voice kept talking, kept pleading, kept using Mendez's exact cadence and phrasing. It had studied him, listened to him, learned how he spoke. At 21:30 hours, the voice changed. Caden, baby, is that you? My stomach dropped straight through the floor. Caden, I don't understand where I am. It's so dark here. I'm scared. Mom's voice, exactly as I remembered it. That slight tremor she got when she was frightened, the way she drew out vowels, the endearment she'd used since I was 6 years old. I stood so fast the chair scraped backward, moved to the center of the lamp room, away from the windows, away from the eastern wall. My heart hammered against my ribs. I think I fell. I can't remember how I got here. Everything's wet and I can't find the lights. Please come help me. She'd died 4 years ago. Pneumonia. I'd been there at the hospital, held her hand through the final 2 days, watched them turn off the machines. This wasn't her. Caden, please, I hear your footsteps. I know you're close. Just call out so I can find you. I clenched my jaw hard enough my teeth ached. Rule 2. Ignore familiar voices. They weren't real. They were things from the trench, from that 12,000-foot darkness, using sounds they'd collected somehow. Broadcasts, maybe. Radio transmissions. Voices carried across the water and absorbed and replayed. Baby, I'm so cold. The water keeps rising. I don't want to drown. My hands shook. I shoved them in my jacket pockets and focused on the beacon mechanism. Watched the Fresnel lens rotate. Watched the light sweep across the windows in its 12-second cycle. Mechanical, predictable, real. The voice continued for another 20 minutes, sometimes pleading, sometimes confused, sometimes angry. Why wouldn't I help her? Didn't I love her? What kind of son abandoned his mother? Each variation perfectly matched her speech patterns, her inflections, her emotional range. At 2153 hours, it stopped. The silence felt worse somehow. I stood in the center of the lamp room, sweat cooling on my back despite the chill, and understood exactly why Mendez had written Rule 2 in his notebook. How many nights had he endured this? How many voices had called to him before he finally broke Rule 4 and looked at what was watching? I checked the beacon rotation. Still smooth. Checked the foghorn pressure. Still stable. Wrote everything in the log with handwriting that barely looked like mine. At 2200 hours, I moved to the western windows, the only ones I'd left uncovered, and lifted the shade 6 inches to look at the ocean. The western waters appeared normal. Dark swells, white caps catching starlight, the distant glow of shipping lanes on the horizon. I dropped the shade and turned back to the eastern wall. Didn't touch those shades. Wouldn't. But I needed to know what was happening out there. The voices had come from the tide pools, which meant something had emerged from the water. Something close to the Lighthouse foundation. I stood at the eastern wall for 5 minutes, hand hovering near the canvas shade, before I finally gripped the bottom edge and lifted it 3 inches. The eastern waters glowed, not like the phosphorescent trails from the first night. This was different, bigger. The glow pulsed in rhythmic patterns, expansion and contraction, exactly like a massive heartbeat. Green-white bioluminescence that lit the fog from below, turning the mist into a sickly, radiant cloud. I raised the shade another 2 inches. The shapes moved beneath the surface, too large to comprehend properly. Each pulse sent light rippling outward in concentric circles, and I could see there were multiple sources. 3. No, 4. Maybe more. They circled something central, something darker than the surrounding water, something that created a void in the bioluminescent display. My hands started to ache. I'd been gripping the shade's edge hard enough to make my knuckles white. The shapes pulsed again, synchronized now. All of them contracting and expanding together, creating waves of light that washed against the rocks below. The rhythm matched something. Took me a moment to place it. A heartbeat. They were pulsing in the pattern of a human heartbeat. I dropped the shade and stepped back. My own heart hammered against my ribs, too fast, irregular. The entities below maintained their steady rhythm. Slow, calm, deliberate. At 22:45 hours, the moon disappeared. I'd been watching the western waters, trying to settle my nerves, when clouds rolled in from the northwest. Thick coverage that swallowed the starlight and turned the night absolutely black. The beacon swept across the darkness, illuminating nothing but fog and void. I returned to the eastern wall, told myself not to look, told myself Rule 4 existed for a reason, lifted the shade anyway. The bioluminescent shapes had intensified. Without moonlight, the glow dominated everything, turning the eastern waters into a field of pulsing green-white light. The fog caught and scattered the illumination, creating halos and false reflections that made distance impossible to judge. Then something surfaced near the rocks. I saw the outline first. Massive. It broke the surface slowly, water streaming off in sheets that caught the bioluminescence. The shape made no sense. My brain tried to categorize it. Whale, submarine, rock formation, but none of the labels fit. It was organic. That much was clear from how it moved, how the water displaced around it, how the other glowing shapes retreated to give it space. The outline defied comprehension. I stared at it, tried to trace the edges, tried to understand the geometry, but the proportions shifted as it moved. What looked like a curve became an angle. What appeared smooth showed texture. Dimensions that shouldn't coexist occupied the same space. My head started to pound. The pressure built behind my eyes, that same sensation I'd felt watching the false ship's lights. I gripped the windowsill and kept staring, kept trying to make sense of the shape, kept failing to process what I was seeing. It had breached perhaps 20 feet from the lighthouse foundation. Close enough I could hear the water cascading off its surface, a sound wrong for the mass it suggested. Too hollow, too resonant, like water falling into an empty cathedral. The bioluminescent shapes pulsed faster now, their rhythm accelerating into something frantic. Then the foghorn sounded. 30 seconds. Automatic response to the fog conditions. The sound vibrated through the lighthouse foundation, through the walls, through my chest. The surfaced thing flinched. Not much. Just a shudder that rippled across its incomprehensible outline. But it reacted. The foghorn's blast had affected it. I dropped the shade and moved to the center of the lamp room. My hands shook badly now. The headache pulsed in time with my heartbeat, sharp enough to make my vision blur at the edges. I'd looked too long, tried to understand something that wasn't meant to be understood. The foghorn sounded again. 30-second interval. Automatic. Precise. Through the floor I felt vibration, not from the foghorn this time. Something else, something moving against the lighthouse foundation. The vibration traveled up through the stone walls, a sensation more than a sound, pressure and displacement and wrongness. I knelt and pressed my palm against the floor. The vibration came in pulses, rhythmic, searching, something probing the foundation, testing it, exploring the barrier between water and light. The foghorn sounded. The vibration stopped. I waited, counted seconds. At 29 seconds, the vibration resumed. Stronger now, more insistent. At 30 seconds, the foghorn blasted and the vibration ceased immediately. At 45 seconds, the vibration returned. Multiple sources now. I felt them through the floor. Distinct points of contact against the foundation, moving and shifting and probing, testing the structure, looking for weaknesses. The foghorn sounded. Everything stopped. I stayed kneeling on the floor, palm pressed to the stone, and understood. The foghorn wasn't just for navigation, it wasn't marking the lighthouse's position for ships. The 30-second interval, the exact timing Thompson had emphasized in Rule 6. Maintain exact foghorn timing as it deters entities from approaching the lighthouse structure. It was a barrier, a sonic fence. Something in that frequency, that rhythm, that precise 30-second pattern drove them back. The vibrations returned at 50 seconds. I felt them converge, multiple points becoming a line becoming a band of pressure that wrapped around the foundation. The stone beneath my palm thrummed with it. The entities were coordinating now, working together, applying force to the structure itself. The foghorn blasted. The vibrations vanished. I lifted my hand from the floor and saw the tremor in my fingers. Understood what would happen if the foghorn failed, if the timing slipped, if the mechanism jammed or the pressure dropped, or the automated system malfunctioned. The entities would reach the foundation, would climb the rocks, would find ways inside. I stood and moved to the equipment panel, checked the foghorn pressure gauge. 85%, normal range. Checked the automated timing mechanism, functioning correctly. Checked the backup pressure tank, full. Everything working as designed. Below, the vibrations returned. I felt them through my boots. 30 seconds later, the foghorn drove them back. I returned to the desk and sat down. Picked up Thompson's maintenance log and read Rule 6 again. Then Rule 1, never shine the beacon toward eastern waters, as it attracts, rather than repels the entities. Then Rule 5 about false distress calls. Then Rule 7 about beacon failure procedures. Remain sealed in the lamp room until dawn because the beacon's rotation creates a protective pattern. The rules weren't suggestions. Weren't precautions based on superstition or excessive caution. They were combat protocols, defensive measures. Each one addressed a specific threat, a specific entity behavior, a specific way they tested the lighthouse's barriers. I thought about Mendez's notebook, the entries documenting phenomena over months of observation, the careful recording of entity patterns and capabilities. He'd been studying them, learning their nature, understanding the threat. Then he'd broken Rule 4, looked at what was watching, made direct eye contact with the primary forms, dead within 72 hours. I set the log down and listened to the foghorn blast again, felt the vibrations stop. The entities weren't just testing the lighthouse's defenses, they were testing me, learning my limits, finding the psychological pressure points that would make me break protocol. The voices had been attempts at emotional manipulation. The bioluminescent display had been visual bait. The surface thing had been offered for observation, knowing human curiosity would compel closer examination. Every phenomenon was calculated, purposeful, designed to create specific responses. The foghorn sounded. The vibrations ceased. The pattern repeated. I understood now. The rules weren't protecting me from my curiosity. They were containing something that had lived in that 12,000-foot trench for longer than I could imagine, something that had evolved in pressure and darkness and absolute isolation, something ancient and patient and completely malevolent. The lighthouse wasn't a navigation beacon, it was a prison guard tower. The beam, the foghorn, the protocols, they were walls and bars and locks keeping something contained, keeping it from reaching the shallows, from reaching the shore, from reaching whatever lay beyond. And I was the warden, alone on this rock, maintaining the barriers, following the rules. Because if I didn't, if the lighthouse went dark, Thompson had said the entities would reach the mainland within 6 hours. The foghorn blasted, the vibration stopped. I sat in the lamp room and watched the beacon rotate through its 12-second cycle, understanding exactly what I'd volunteered for when I'd accepted this assignment. Not maintenance work, not isolation duty, guard detail against something that had killed every keeper who'd failed to follow the protocols exactly. I checked my watch. 0147 hours. Still had hours before dawn. The entities circled below, probing and testing and waiting. The foghorn kept them at bay, 30 seconds at a time. I picked up the pencil and made my entries in the log, kept my handwriting steady, kept my observations clinical. Didn't write what I was really thinking, that I was alone on this rock with things that shouldn't exist, maintaining barriers that were the only thing standing between the deep and the shore. The foghorn sounded. The beacon rotated. The entities waited. I stayed in the lamp room and counted seconds until dawn. The beacon died at 0147 hours on the third night. One moment the lamp room was filled with that steady, rotating glow. 12-second cycles I'd been counting in my sleep. The next moment, darkness. Complete and absolute. The kind that presses against your eyeballs. The motor kept running. I could hear it. That familiar diesel rumble beneath the floor. But the beam itself had gone dark, and in the silence after the motor noise registered, I understood what that meant. I was on my feet before conscious thought caught up. My hand found the flashlight on my belt. Muscle memory from the equipment checks Thompson had drilled into the protocols. The beam cut through the lamp room darkness, and I moved to the lamp mechanism, already running through the troubleshooting sequence Marcus had shown me on that first day. Bulb failure. Had to be. I checked the primary bulb housing. The tungsten filament sat intact inside its glass shell. No breaks I could see. I touched the glass. Cold. Not the residual heat you'd expect from a bulb that had been burning for hours. Electrical fault then. I traced the power cable from the bulb, housing down to the junction box mounted on the western wall. My flashlight beam showed all connections secure, no visible damage to the insulation. I flipped the emergency backup switch Thompson had marked with red paint. Nothing. The backup bulb should have ignited immediately. Redundant systems, that's what Marcus had said. If the primary fails, the backup kicks in automatic. But the lamp room stayed dark, just my flashlight beam cutting through the blackness, and somewhere in my chest something cold started spreading. I moved to the windows. My hands found the canvas shade over the eastern window, the one I'd secured at sunset like I'd done the previous 2 nights. Thompson's Rule 7 played in my head, his exact words from the official log. If the beacon fails during night hours, remain sealed in the lamp room until dawn. Do not attempt repairs in darkness. Do not open exterior doors. Do not look toward eastern waters. The beam's absence will draw them closer. They will test boundaries, maintain position, and await sunrise. Remain in the lamp room. Don't look east. My fingers gripped the canvas shade's bottom edge. I knew what I was about to do violated the protocols. Knew it the same way you know touching a hot stove will burn you, but you do it anyway, because some part of your brain needs to confirm what logic already told you. I lifted the shade 3 inches. The eastern waters were moving. Not wave motion. Something else. Something that made my stomach clench and my throat go dry. They were rising. Towering shapes emerged from the ocean, massive forms that defied the eye's ability to process scale or proportion. I saw, God, I don't know what I saw. Surfaces that reflected the starlight in patterns that hurt to look at. Geometries that seemed to fold in on themselves. Angles that existed in dimensions my brain couldn't map. The shapes moved with deliberate purpose, not the random drift of sea creatures, but coordinated motion, organized and intelligent. They were coming toward shore. I counted 5 distinct forms, each one different from the others, but sharing that same quality of wrongness, that sense of looking at something that shouldn't exist in the same physical space as rocks and water and air. The nearest one rose maybe 40 feet above the waterline. Hard to judge distance or height when the thing you're looking at keeps shifting its proportions. The shape moved through the shallows between the lighthouse and the eastern rocks. Water cascaded off surfaces that seemed to be made of liquid shadow and solidified light simultaneously. I watched it approach, and my hands wouldn't release the canvas shade, wouldn't drop the fabric, and block out the sight. The building shuddered. The vibration came up through the floor, rattled the lamp mechanism, shook dust from the ceiling beams. Not the gentle testing probes I'd felt the previous night when the entities had explored the foundation between foghorn blasts. This was impact, deliberate force. Something massive had struck the lighthouse. I dropped the shade and stumbled back from the window, my flashlight beam swinging wild across the lamp room walls. The floor shuddered again, harder this time, and I heard metal groans somewhere below in the tower structure. My knees hit the deck and I grabbed the lamp mechanism's base support to keep from falling as the entire building swayed. The foghorn was still running. I could hear it through the floor. That 30-second interval Thompson had said was critical. But the beacon was dark, and according to the protocols, that meant the sonic barrier was the only thing left between me and whatever was circling below. I stayed on the floor, counting seconds, waiting for the next foghorn blast. 30 seconds. The horn sounded, that deep bellow I'd heard dozens of times over the past 3 nights. The building's shuddering stopped immediately. The groaning metal went silent. I started counting again. At 23 seconds, the shuddering resumed. Something was timing the intervals, learning the pattern, testing the foundation in the gaps between blasts. At 30 seconds, the horn sounded and everything stopped. I pulled myself up using the lamp mechanism and swept my flashlight across the lamp room. The beam caught something on the eastern wall, a dark line running from floor to ceiling that hadn't been there during my sunset inspection. A crack. I moved closer. The crack was maybe 1/8 of an inch wide, irregular, following the mortar line between stones. My flashlight showed darkness beyond, and as I watched, something pale and viscous began seeping through. Phosphorescent fluid. The same green-white bioluminescence I'd seen in the eastern waters through the binoculars. It oozed through the crack in thick droplets that clung to the stone instead of running down the wall like water would. The droplets pulsed with that same organic rhythm I'd observed in the ocean, like they were part of something alive. The temperature dropped. I felt it happen in seconds. The lamp room had been comfortable, maybe 60 degrees from the generator heat rising through the tower. Now my breath came out in visible fog, and my fingers started going numb where I gripped the flashlight. I checked the thermometer mounted by the door. 38 degrees, falling as I watched. 36. 34. The phosphorescent fluid kept seeping through the crack, and where it touched the floor, it began spreading in patterns that looked almost like script. Symbols or letters from some language I didn't recognize, glowing against the dark wood. More cracks appeared. I heard them forming, sharp reports like gunfire in the frigid air. The western wall sprouted 3 new fissures, and the northern wall developed a spiderweb pattern radiating from the window frame. Phosphorescent fluid seeped through all of them, that pale green-white glow illuminating the lamp room with sick light. The building shuddered again, harder than before. I grabbed the desk to stay upright, and my flashlight fell, rolled across the floor toward the eastern wall. The beam pointed at the canvas-covered window, and through the fabric I could see shadows moving. Massive shadows that blocked out the starlight, shapes that pressed against the glass, testing the windows, looking for entry points. The thermometer read 29 degrees. My teeth were chattering now, my whole body shaking from cold that had nothing to do with weather or wind. This was something else, something that came from those shapes outside, like they carried winter in their wake. The foghorn sounded its 30-second blast and the shuddering stopped. I counted through chattering teeth, watching the phosphorescent fluid pulse on the walls in rhythm with my heartbeat. At 15 seconds I saw them. Angles appeared in the darkness between my flashlight beam and the walls. Geometries that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. Corners that turned in directions my eyes couldn't follow. I tried to look away, but the angles were everywhere now, infecting my peripheral vision, making the lamp room's familiar rectangular space fold and twist into shapes that caused instant nausea. My eyes watered. Tears froze on my cheeks. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the angles remained, burned into my retinas, or maybe into my brain itself. I could see them with my eyes closed. Impossible mathematics made manifest, dimensions intersecting in ways that made my mind reel. The foghorn sounded again. I opened my eyes. The angles were still there, but fainter now, overlaying the lamp room's normal geometry. The phosphorescent fluid had spread across most of the floor, those strange symbols glowing brighter in the frigid air. The building shuddered. Metal groaned. Stone cracked. Something was circling the lighthouse. I could feel it through the floor, that sense of massive presence moving with purpose. Not random, not animal instinct. This was intelligence, ancient and patient and utterly inhuman. They were testing every surface, every weakness. The cracks widened and more fluid seeped through, and the temperature kept dropping until ice crystals formed on the metal surfaces. I stood in the center of the lamp room, shaking from cold and terror, my breath fogging in air that tasted like deep ocean and older things. The canvas shades billowed inward like something was pressing against them from outside. The floor vibrated with each impact against the foundation. Strange geometries twisted through my vision, angles that made me want to scream. But I didn't move toward the door. Didn't try to run down the stairs to the keeper's quarters or the basement. Didn't open the windows to see what was circling outside. I stayed exactly where Thompson's protocols said to stay, remained sealed in the lamp room like Rule 7 demanded, even though every instinct screamed at me to flee, to get away from the seeping fluid and the impossible angles and the cold that was freezing the moisture in my lungs. The rules were all I had left, the only barrier between me and whatever had taken Mendez 3 days after he'd looked at what was watching him. So I stood there in the darkness, counting seconds between foghorn blasts, while the entities closed in around the lighthouse and tested every weakness they could find. The generator's backup system engaged with a metallic clunk somewhere deep in the lighthouse foundation. I felt the vibration travel up through the stone, through the floor plates, into my boots. Different from the entity impacts. Mechanical, human-made. The lamp mechanism above me whined as power surged through dormant circuits. I looked up. The backup bulb ignited with a sharp crack of heating tungsten, and brilliant white light flooded the lamp room, reflecting off the Fresnel lenses and geometric patterns that swept across the walls, the floor. My hands still gripping the central support column. The beacon was rotating again. 12-second cycles. The light swung across the eastern windows where canvas shades hung limp against the glass, then continued its programmed arc across the western approaches, the northern rocks, the southern channel. My breath still fogged in the freezing air. 29 degrees, maybe colder now. But the light was back. The barrier was restored. I stood there counting the rotation. 12 seconds. 12 seconds. 12 seconds. The building stopped shuddering. The entities retreated with sounds I'd never heard before and hope never to hear again. grinding metal first. Not the clean screech of steel on steel, but something organic producing mechanical noise, like bone fragments rotating inside iron cylinders. The sound came through the eastern wall, through the cracks where phosphorescent fluid still seeped in pulsing patterns. I could feel the vibrations in my jaw, in my teeth, in the bones behind my ears. Then breaking glass. Except nothing was breaking. The windows remained intact behind their canvas shades. The Fresnel lenses showed no fractures, but the sound kept coming. High-pitched crystalline shattering that seemed to emanate from the entities themselves as they withdrew. Like their bodies were made of something that approximated glass but wasn't. Something that broke and reformed and broke again with each movement through the water. The sounds moved away from the lighthouse foundation. East, back toward the deep trench where 12,000 feet of pressure and darkness had twisted life into forms that shouldn't exist. I stayed gripped to the support column, counting beacon rotations, listening to the retreat. The grinding metal faded first, then the breaking glass, then just the foghorn's 30-second intervals, and the normal crash of waves against rock, and the generator's steady hum below. They were gone. Not dead. Not destroyed. Just driven back by the light. I let go of the column. My hands were cramped into claws from gripping cold metal for, I checked my watch, 47 minutes. Felt longer. Felt like hours in that darkness, with the foundation shaking and impossible angles burning themselves into my vision. The lamp room looked wrong in the beacon's rotating light. I'd seen it pristine just hours ago during my 1700 equipment check. Clean stone walls, painted metal floor plates, organized tool cabinet, maintenance log on the desk. Now the eastern wall bore gouges, deep ones. I crossed the lamp room, stepping over spreading pools of phosphorescent fluid that still glowed green-white in pulsing patterns. The gouges ran vertically down the stone blocks, 4 parallel marks each, spaced like fingers but wider. Claw marks, if claws were made of something harder than granite. The stone hadn't chipped or crumbled. It had been scraped away in smooth channels, each one 2 inches deep and 3 inches wide, running from ceiling to floor. I touched the edge of one gouge. The stone was still cold, colder than the ambient temperature. My finger went numb instantly and I pulled back, shoving my hand in my jacket pocket. There were more gouges on the northern wall, different pattern, horizontal this time, concentrated near the foundation level where the lamp room floor met the stonework. Something had been testing the structural integrity there, probing for weakness. The scratches were precise, methodical, spaced at exact intervals. Engineers. That's what Thompson had called them when he explained the trench. Things that evolved in pressure and darkness, developing intelligence adapted to an environment humans couldn't survive. They weren't mindless. They were calculating, testing defenses with systematic efficiency. The western wall showed impact damage, spiderweb cracks radiating from 3 separate points, where something massive had struck the stone with enough force to fracture it. Not break through, the wall still held. But the structural damage was visible. Hairline fractures spreading outward in geometric patterns, weakening the integrity even if the barrier remained intact. They'd marked every wall except the southern one, the side facing the mainland, the direction they wanted to go. The black stain spread across the lamp room floor from the eastern wall. Not the phosphorescent fluid. That stuff still glowed in pulsing symbols I couldn't read. This was different. Darker. It had seeped through the cracks where the entities had gouged the stone, spreading in tendrils across the painted metal floor plates toward the center of the room. I crouched next to the nearest tendril. The black substance didn't reflect the beacon's light. It absorbed it, created a void in the rotating illumination where the stain existed, like a hole cut in reality. The temperature around the stain was wrong. I could feel cold radiating upward, but my skin prickled with heat simultaneously. contradictory sensations that shouldn't coexist. I pulled off my glove and held my bare hand 6 inches above the surface. Cold. No. Hot. Both. Neither. I jerked my hand back. The stain continued spreading. Slow but steady, following the seams between floor plates, finding every gap and crack and weakness in the lamp room's construction. Growing. I grabbed the maintenance log from the desk and flipped through Thompson's expanded protocols, looking for anything about black stains or residue or nothing. The rules covered visual contact, voice mimicry, false distress calls, foghorn timing, beacon failure procedures, but nothing about what the entities left behind after they touched the lighthouse structure, because Mendez never got this far. He'd looked at them on his 10th night and gone catatonic within 72 hours. He never survived a beacon failure. Never saw them assault the Foundation. Never witnessed what they left behind when the light drove them back. I was in uncharted territory now. I stood in the center of the lamp room as the beacon rotated overhead and the black stain spread across the floor, and the temperature fluctuated between freezing and burning. The lighthouse wasn't just a navigation aid. I'd understood that intellectually when Thompson explained the trench, when I read Mendez's rules, when I heard the false distress calls and the mimicked voices. I'd known the beacon served as a barrier, the foghorn as a deterrent, the protocols as survival instructions. But standing there surrounded by claw marks and impact fractures and spreading contamination, I understood it differently. This was a prison. The 12,000-foot trench held things that had evolved in an environment so hostile that pressure alone would crush human bodies into pulp. Darkness so complete that bioluminescence became a primary sense. Cold that turned water viscous. An alien world separated from ours by a few miles of ocean and the accident of depth. And something down there had developed intelligence. Not human intelligence. Something else. Something that learned to mimic voices and project false images and coordinate attacks with systematic precision. Something that wanted to reach the surface. Wanted to cross those few miles to the mainland where 6 hours of darkness would let them spread inland to... I didn't know. Couldn't imagine. Didn't want to. The lighthouse kept them contained. The beacon's light created a barrier they couldn't cross. The foghorn's sonic pulses prevented approach. The protocols ensured the systems never failed long enough for them to break through. And I was the warden. Not a Coast Guard lighthouse keeper maintaining navigation equipment for commercial shipping. Not a solitary watchman earning hazard pay for 2-week rotations. I was a prison guard stationed alone on an isolated rock, maintaining the only barriers preventing ancient entities from reaching populated areas. Thompson had known. He'd chosen me specifically, someone analytical enough to follow complex protocols, determined enough to maintain discipline under psychological pressure, isolated enough that my disappearance wouldn't create complications. Expendable. That was the word I couldn't avoid anymore. Marcus knew too. His reluctance during that first supply delivery, his warnings about following Thompson's instructions, his careful avoidance of discussing Mendez's fate. He'd been running supplies to this prison for 6 years, watching keepers rotate through, knowing some of them wouldn't come back. I looked at the black stain spreading across the floor, at the gouges carved into granite walls, at the cracks radiating from impact points where things strong enough to shake a stone lighthouse had tested the foundation. The full horror of my position settled into my chest like freezing water. I was alone on an isolated rock station, surrounded by entities that had killed my predecessor, maintaining equipment that had just failed catastrophically, with no backup and no reinforcements and no escape until Marcus arrived with Sunday's supply delivery. 4 more days. The beacon rotated overhead. The foghorn sounded its 30-second interval. The black stain crept another inch across the floor. I picked up the maintenance log and wrote the time. 0234 hours. Then I started documenting everything. The helicopter arrived at 0547 hours, 43 minutes before official sunrise. I heard the rotors first. That distinctive thump cutting through the foghorn's 30-second cycle and the waves crashing against western rocks. I was still in the lamp room, still standing near the support column where I'd gripped metal hard enough to leave my palms bruised. The black stain had spread another 6 inches across the floor plates since 0234 hours. The phosphorescent fluid had stopped glowing around 0400 but remained wet, pooling in the gouges that ran floor to ceiling along the eastern wall. I moved to the western window and lifted the canvas shade. The Coast Guard helicopter descended through gray dawn light, running lights blinking red and white against clouds that hung low over the ocean. Thompson dropped from the open door before the skids touched the landing pad, boots hitting concrete while the helicopter was still 3 feet up. He didn't wait for the rotors to stop. Just walked straight toward the lighthouse entrance with that same predatory grace I'd noticed during his last visit, moving across the landing pad with fluid control that looked wrong in a man his age. The helicopter lifted off immediately, banking west toward the mainland. Thompson didn't look back at it. I descended from the lamp room, legs stiff from standing motionless for hours, and met him in the keeper's quarters. He stood in the doorway, looking at me with those pale blue eyes that caught the beacon's rotating light and reflected it back with metallic shine. "Show me," he said. Not a question, not a greeting. Just 2 words that meant he already knew what had happened during the night, already understood why the emergency beacon failure had triggered some kind of alert on the mainland, already expected to find damage and contamination and a keeper barely holding together after surviving an assault that should have killed him. I led him up to the lamp room without speaking. My throat felt raw, maybe from the cold that had dropped the temperature to 29 degrees, maybe from breathing hard during the hours of terror, while entities circled the foundation and tested every weakness in the stone. Thompson examined the gouges in the eastern wall first. He ran his fingers along the 4 parallel marks, tracing their depth and spacing with clinical precision. His expression didn't change. He moved to the northern wall and studied the horizontal gouges, then crossed to the western wall and placed his palm flat against the spiderweb cracks radiating from impact points. "Primary breach attempt," he said. His voice was neutral, measured. "Coordinated assault pattern. 5 entities, synchronized timing between foghorn intervals. Not questions. Statements he already knew." He crouched beside the black stain spreading across the floor plates, holding his hand 6 inches above the surface the same way I had. His jaw tightened, the first reaction I'd seen from him since he arrived. "This is new," he said quietly. I found my voice. It came out rougher than I intended. It started spreading after the beacon came back online, after they retreated. Thompson stood and turned to face me. The rotating beacon swept across his features every 12 seconds, illuminating the deep lines around his eyes and mouth. "You looked," he said. "You lifted the eastern shade during beacon failure." My hands were shaking. I shoved them in my jacket pockets. I needed to see what was coming. Rule 7 explicitly prohibits. I know what Rule 7 says. The words came out sharper than I meant. I also know that sitting blind while the building collapsed around me wasn't going to keep me alive. Thompson studied me for a long moment. The beacon rotated. The foghorn sounded. Waves crashed against rocks below. "You're still standing," he finally said. Mendez wasn't, after he looked. That stopped me. I'd been preparing for reprimand, for dismissal, for Thompson to pull me off the lighthouse the same way he'd arrived, immediate extraction via helicopter. Instead, he was comparing my survival to Mendez's death. "Sit down," Thompson said, gesturing to the desk chair. I sat. My legs gave out easier than I expected, muscles cramping from hours of locked tension. Thompson remained standing, positioned between me and the eastern wall with its floor-to-ceiling gouges. The beacon rotated behind him, casting his shadow across the black stain that continued its slow spread toward the southern wall. Patrick Mendez was a good keeper, Thompson began. His voice shifted into something different. Not quite regret, but close. Memory, maybe. Followed protocols perfectly for the first 8 months. Best rotation logs I'd seen in 15 years. Precise timing, detailed observations, 0 protocol violations. I waited. My heart was still hammering from the night's assault, adrenaline making my hands shake despite shoving them deep in my pockets. Then he got curious. Thompson's pale eyes fixed on me. Started asking questions during radio check-ins. Wanted to know what the entities were, where they came from, why the beacon kept them contained. I gave him the same information I gave you. Deep trench, evolved in isolation. Beacon serves as barrier. Should have been enough. The foghorn sounded, 30 seconds exactly. It wasn't enough, I said. No. Thompson moved to the western window and lifted the canvas shade, looking out at normal ocean, gray water, whitecaps, morning light breaking through clouds. Mendez started experimenting. Altered the beacon's rotation pattern during his 9th month. Changed it from 12 seconds to 15, then to 10. Wanted to see how the entities would respond. Jesus. I'd read Mendez's notebook, studied his survival rules, followed his protocols. Never imagined he'd been the one breaking them deliberately. They responded. Thompson continued, still facing the window. Started surfacing more frequently. Began testing the foghorn intervals. Mendez documented everything in his personal log, the one you found in the basement. Wrote detailed observations about entity behavior, movement patterns, coordination methods. He was trying to communicate with them, I said. Thompson turned from the window. Yes. And they killed him for it. Eventually. Thompson crossed back to the desk and leaned against it, arms folded across his chest. First they learned from him. Studied his patterns the same way he studied theirs. Figured out that human curiosity could be exploited. Started using the voices, calling from the tide pools, mimicking people Mendez knew. He documented the first voice incidents in his notebook. Thought he was gathering intelligence about their capabilities. The beacon rotated. I could see it reflected in Thompson's eyes, that metallic shine that wasn't quite human. He didn't understand he was teaching them how to hunt us, I said. Not until it was too late. Thompson's voice went flat. By the time Mendez realized his experiments had given the entities new tools for psychological manipulation, he'd already broken Rule 4, looked directly at a primary form during the new moon. Visual contact caused progressive neurological damage. You read about that in the protocols. 72 hours later, he was catatonic. Couldn't operate the beacon. Couldn't follow basic procedures. The lighthouse went dark on a Tuesday night at 0312 hours. I remembered the final transmission Marcus had played for me. Mendez reporting shapes circling in eastern waters, warning against sending anyone at night. That had been his last coherent communication before whatever happened in the darkness took him. The entities reached the Foundation that night, Thompson said. Same as they did for you. But Mendez wasn't capable of maintaining protocols anymore. He went down to the tide pools at 0340 hours. Walked straight into the eastern waters. My stomach turned. You found the body? We found pieces. Thompson's expression didn't change. Enough for the official report to call it accidental drowning. Enough to know that visual contact with primary forms does exactly what the protocols warn about, destroys cognitive function and self-preservation instinct within 72 hours. The foghorn sounded. I counted 30 seconds in my head, waiting for the next blast. The lighthouse stands above a trench, Thompson said. 12,000 feet deep, running parallel to the continental shelf for 40 miles. Standard charts show it as shallow reefs because we don't want commercial vessels investigating the area. What's down there evolved in complete isolation, Extreme pressure, total darkness, near freezing temperatures, conditions that would crush human bodies and kill surface fish in seconds. I'd heard this before, during Thompson's last visit. But now, after surviving the night's assault, the information carried different weight. Things that evolve in those conditions develop differently, Thompson continued. No light means no eyes, at least not eyes that work the way ours do. They perceive through pressure changes, electromagnetic fields, chemical signatures in the water. But they're intelligent. More intelligent than anything else we've encountered in deep ocean environments. And they want out, I said. They want contact. Thompson's correction was precise. The surface world represents everything their environment lacks. Light, warmth, abundant life. They've been contained by depth and pressure for millions of years. The trench keeps them down the same way the beacon keeps them back. But during certain conditions, specific tidal phases, lunar cycles, seasonal current patterns, they can reach the surface near the lighthouse. The black stain had spread another inch while we talked. I watched it move along the seam between floor plates, seeking gaps in the construction with deliberate purpose. The beacon isn't just a navigation aid, I said. No. Thompson followed my gaze to the spreading stain. It's a barrier. The light operates at specific wavelengths that cause the entity's physical pain. They can't cross it. The foghorn generates sonic frequencies that disrupt their coordination and communication. The timing, exactly 30 seconds, creates a pattern they can't adapt to or predict. As long as the beacon rotates and the foghorn sounds at precise intervals, they can't approach the lighthouse or move past it toward the mainland. But if the beacon fails, they reach shore in 6 hours. Thompson's voice went hard. We've calculated the timeline based on their movement speed and the distance to populated coastline. 6 hours from total beacon failure to entities making landfall at the nearest town. Population 4,200. Mostly families, fishing community, tourist season just ending. I thought about the 5 massive shapes I'd seen rising from the eastern waters during the beacon failure. Surfaces that reflected starlight in patterns that caused pain to look at. Geometries that folded in impossible dimensions. What happens when they reach land? I asked. Thompson didn't answer immediately. The beacon rotated. The foghorn sounded. We don't know, he finally said. We've never let them get that far. The rules weren't suggestions, weren't guidelines written by paranoid keepers who'd spent too long alone in a lighthouse. They were containment protocols. Tested procedures designed to maintain a barrier between intelligent predators and an unprotected population that had no idea what hunted in the waters offshore. Curiosity killed Mendez, Thompson said, straightening from the desk. He wanted to understand the entities, wanted to communicate and study their behavior. That curiosity led him to experiment with the beacon, which taught the entities how to exploit human psychology, which led to visual contact and neurological damage, which led to protocol breakdown and beacon failure, which led to him walking into the eastern waters at 0340 hours on a Tuesday morning. He moved to the eastern wall and placed his palm flat against the stone between the 4 parallel gouges. You're curious too, he said without turning around. I can see it in your maintenance logs. Detailed observations, precise documentation, questions about entity behavior and origins. Same pattern Mendez showed in his early months. My throat went dry. I'm following protocols. You are. Thompson turned to face me. You're also trying to understand what you're containing. Natural human response to fear and isolation. Gather information, analyze patterns, build a mental model that makes the threat comprehensible. Mendez did the same thing. I'm not experimenting with the beacon. Not yet. Thompson crossed back to where I sat. But you will be tempted. You'll wonder if the entities can be reasoned with, communicated with, understood on some level beyond just keeping them contained. You'll think about altering the beacon pattern just to see what happens. Testing the foghorn timing. Observing their response to small protocol variations. The beacon rotated. I could feel its light sweep across the back of my neck. "Don't," Thompson said. The single word carried absolute authority. The entities aren't animals following instinct. They're intelligent enough to coordinate attacks, mimic human voices, generate false distress signals, and time their movements to foghorn intervals. They study us the same way Mendez studied them. Every observation you make, they're making observations about you. Every pattern you establish, they're learning to exploit. I thought about the voice that had called from the tide pools using Patrick Mendez's exact speech patterns and Texas drawl, the distress transmission from the Meridian Star with crying women and frightened children. My mother's voice asking me to help her find the lights. They learn what we respond to, I said. Yes. Thompson's pale eyes caught the beacon's light. And they use it against us. Curiosity killed Mendez because it made him predictable. He wanted to understand them, so they showed him things that would feed that curiosity. Drew him in deeper until he crossed the line from observer to participant. Once he looked directly at a primary form, the neurological damage was inevitable. The foghorn sounded. 30 seconds exactly. I understood then. Really understood. The lighthouse wasn't a guard post or a navigation aid or even a prison. It was a front line, a barrier between two forms of intelligence that couldn't coexist, one that evolved in light and warmth and relied on vision and verbal communication, another that evolved in pressure and darkness and perceived through methods I couldn't comprehend. The rules existed because previous keepers had died learning what worked and what didn't, how long entities could maintain voice mimicry, what happened during visual contact, which protocols kept them contained, and which failures let them through. I was the current keeper in a long line of expendable guards maintaining a barrier that couldn't be allowed to fail. Thompson had sent me here knowing I might die the same way Mendez had. Marcus delivered supplies every Sunday knowing he might find my body the way he'd found pieces of Patrick's. I serve as both guardian and prisoner, I said quietly. Thompson nodded. You guard the mainland from entities that would reach it in 6 hours if the beacon failed. You're imprisoned here by the same duty. Can't leave the lighthouse unmanned, can't allow the barrier to collapse, can't stop watching the eastern waters for signs they're rising from the trench. The black stain had reached the southern wall. I watched it spread along the base where stone met floor, seeking weaknesses in the foundation, the same way the entities had during the night's assault. How long? I asked. Mendez lasted 11 months before visual contact. The keeper before him made it 14. The one before that died after 6 weeks. Ignored the foghorn timing and they took him during low tide. Thompson moved toward the doorway. Some keepers last years. Some die in days. Depends on how well you follow protocols and how strong your discipline stays when isolation and fear start breaking down your judgment. I stood on shaking legs. The beacon rotated overhead. The foghorn sounded. I can't leave, I said. No. Thompson stopped in the doorway. You accepted the position. You know what's contained here. You understand the consequences of beacon failure. You're bound to this lighthouse the same way the entities are bound to the trench, by conditions you can't change and a barrier you can't cross. He descended the stairs. I heard his boots on the metal steps, then on the stone foundation, then on the wooden stairs carved into the rock face leading down to the landing pad. I moved to the western window and lifted the canvas shade. Thompson stood on the concrete pad, radio in hand, calling for extraction. The helicopter appeared 10 minutes later, descending through morning light that had burned through the low clouds. Thompson climbed aboard. The helicopter banked west toward the mainland. I remained in the lamp room, surrounded by gouges in the eastern wall, cracks in the western stone, black stains spreading across the floor. The beacon rotated in 12-second cycles. The foghorn sounded at 30-second intervals. Below, in the eastern waters, things that evolved in complete isolation circled the lighthouse foundation, waiting for the next protocol failure, the next moment of weakness or curiosity or fear that would give them an opening to cross the barrier and reach the surface world they hungered for. I was their keeper and their prisoner both, forever watching the eastern waters for signs of the deep things rising, bound to maintain the beacon's protective light against the horrors that lurked in the depths below. The sun rose over the Atlantic. The ocean looked normal in morning light. Gray water, white caps, distant horizon. I pulled down the western shade and moved to the desk. Opened Thompson's maintenance log to a fresh page. Wrote the date and time. 0647 hours. Beacon operational. Foghorn maintaining exact 30-second intervals. Black stain spreading across lamp room floor. 4 days until next supply delivery. I stopped writing and listened to the foghorn sound. Started counting seconds until the next blast. 1, 2, 3, 4. The entities were still down there, still circling, still waiting. 5, 6, 7, 8. I was still up here, still watching, still counting. 9, 10, 11, 12. The beacon rotated. 13, 14, 15. The eastern waters were quiet. 16, 17, 18. For now.